find a group that looks like they know what they're doing and start educating yourself, and that's a good start. And then you could take it from there. How involved do you want to be? There's nothing wrong with remaining a passive partner. That's perfectly fine. You can make a lot of wealth like that, or that can turn your fire on. And then that's going to like motivate you to go seek out, what do I really like? Do I like multifamily? Do I like assisted living facilities? You can do anything like RV parks, like you name it, there's something for everyone.
Welcome to the Physicians and Properties Podcast, the show where we teach you how investing in real estate can give you the freedom to practice medicine and live life how you want.
Doctor!
Now, here's your host, Dr. Alex Schloe.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Physicians and Properties Podcast. As always, I'm your host, Dr. Alex Schloe, and I am so excited today to be joined by Yasser Rodriguez. Dr. Rodriguez is a Harvard-trained cardiac electrophysiologist, so he is way smarter than me, and he's founder of Cardia Real Estate Investments, where he helps physicians build passive, tax-efficient wealth through commercial real estate. Dr. Rodriguez, thanks for joining us on the podcast today. How are things going?
Yeah, no, thanks for having me, Alex. Things are busy, man. Good, but very busy. I was just talking to Alex there. He has 2 kids. We have 3 young kids ourselves. So balancing everything is always, challenging to say the least.
Oh, absolutely. Especially my oldest, my 5-year-old Jack, he's realized like when I have a podcast. So he'll always ask, like, hey, do you have a podcast tonight? Because then try and sneak out of bed. He knows that dad's not watching or I take him upstairs. So I bet when I get up, I'll see his little feet take off.
He's clever, man.
Yeah, he is, man. He's a smart kid, but it is fun. Yeah. Balance is, it's a tough thing, man, for sure. And I'm sure we'll dive a little bit more into that. But before we do, I'd love to just kind of hear your story of how you got started in medicine. What did that journey look like for you?
Yeah. So, I'm a cardiac electrophysiologist. It was a long journey. My parents both are immigrants. My mom didn't finish high school. My dad, did some college in Cuba, but they immigrated in the late 70s. So it's definitely the first in my family to go to college, much less med school and so on and so forth. So it was a long journey, always interested, in the science aspect and the, the technical aspects and all that. And it was actually, my grandma was my first patient that got me interested in electrophysiology. Like I didn't know what it was as a first year med student, but she actually had dilated cardiomyopathy. So who would then become my mentor down at the University of Miami, he allowed me to scrub in and help put like a defibrillator in her. So I always liked car engines and stuff, and merging equipment with, hearts and stuff was kind of really cool, at that age. And then, just kind of went down the rabbit hole, man. Really, really like EP. It's awesome. It's rewarding in many different levels, but it was really as an attending, I've been out for about 6 years or so, that I started pivoting also to real estate, not to substitute, because I love EP. I love, what I do on a day-to-day basis, but just to kind of complement and give you options.
That's awesome. Yeah, you're a perfect example of, someone who loves the job, still wants to be a doctor, but maybe wants the freedom to practice medicine how they want to. And, it was funny. I posted in a physician group not too long ago, and I was getting a bunch of flack. They were like,
yeah,
why would you want to invest in real estate? Why even be a doctor? Like, just do real estate. And I'm like, you can have multiple passions, right? And I'm a firm believer of, having some degree of passive income or alternative income is going to make you a better doctor and give you that freedom, give you that flexibility to practice medicine how you want. And there's different stages of life. And maybe when the kids are young, you want more time with them. And so it was really funny, man. Sometimes I feel like other physicians are like the worst critics when it comes to financial, strategy and the FIRE movement and all those sorts of things. So anyways, really
started. Yeah, don't even get me started. Yeah. It's weird because you don't see this in other fields, right? Like dentists are a good parallel, right? Dentists, from my simple experience, are very entrepreneurial. Like it's built into their DNA, because when they come out, the usual pathway was you make your own practice. That forces you to, number one, manage human beings, number two, manage a business. And then, they practice medicine, of course, So dentists are very entrepreneurial, but unfortunately, like DOs, MDs, and all that, they're trained, to kind of think in a little more rigid manner. And, a lot of our colleagues will go ahead and open their own businesses and stuff like that. And they're just natural entrepreneurs. But a lot will kind of like shame one another in a way, especially the more quote unquote academic they are. They're like, oh, no, no, no. It should be okay to get paid a fraction of, what you would normally get paid like in private practice or like in any other model. And then, it's weird because they work just as hard, but they're expected to like, write research grants and do research on weekends and at nights during the week. And it's odd. So then the minute that you mention, oh, real estate, it's like this dirty concept, like, oh, how dare you even mention the word investment and passive wealth? Like, it's just like, it's something that has dawned on me over the years. And you say, that's been your experience as well. I have a lot of my colleagues, and that's why I really celebrate that you created, the Facebook group that you did. It's almost like, taking the shame out of it. It's like, hey guys, it's okay to absolutely love what you do. It doesn't make you less of a doctor in any way, but if anything, it frees up. You govern your own time, and you're your own boss in a way,
Right. Yeah, I completely agree. I feel like, as physicians, we've gone through like such rigorous training and so many difficult things. Like really, we should be trying to figure out collectively as physicians, how can we make like the career in like physician life as great as possible and optimize for some of those other things that exist. And I think we're heading in the right direction by and large, but I think a lot of people, maybe got preyed upon, and that's really, sad and frustrating because we don't get a lot of financial education and literacy. And so I think there is that stigma that like doctors are dumb and rich when it comes to financial opportunities. And so I think that's part of it. I think the other thing, and I might get some flack for this, is I think it's just the fear of the unknown, know, and like, which blows my mind because we're all lifelong learners and like the physician brain is the most incredible thing. Sure. But for some reason, it's like, hey, when it comes to like, hey, investments, entrepreneurship, like I would just much rather rip you and build and tear you down than help build you up. Yeah. And or just be like, hey, can you tell me a little bit more about that? So anyways, a little tangent there, but for folks that are listening, we're really glad you're here and glad that you probably don't feel that way if you're listening to the podcast, and just know that like genuinely we're here to help make physicians' lives better and practices better and get you more time with your family if that's what you want to do, or more time doing the things that you love. So I appreciate that little sidebar there because it's just something I've been thinking about a good bit as well going forward, especially as we're going into the new year. But let's go ahead and talk about that. So you mentioned EP. First off, how long did it take you to go all the way through med school training and to be attending in electrophysiology?
Yeah. So the usual path is, after med school, you do 3 years of internal medicine, then 3 years of cardiology fellowship, and then 2 years of EP. So usually it's about 8 years cumulative, after you're done. It's a great field, it's a great field in many different ways, like I love doing procedures, so it's a good balance of like the human interaction, like in clinic. I like talking to people and meeting people and all that stuff. So it preserves those like internal medicine elements, that, you like when you go down that route, but it also throws in procedure elements in a more controlled fashion. So like EP, some people jokingly say like elective procedures only, like EP, but it usually is more predictable, as opposed to, all the respect in the world to like my interventional colleagues, but they don't have the luxury of people don't, choose when to have a heart attack or something, So usually EP is a little more predictable. You got procedure days, you got clinic days, and you kind of divvy up your schedule there.
That's awesome. Yeah, it sounds like a pretty great blend as a whole of clinic and procedures, kind of mix things up, keep it fun, I'm sure, from that perspective. Well, what did coming out of residency, what did money look like or feel like for you at the end of training? Did you have any medical school debt or anything like that?
Yeah, a lot of it. So being the, kind of first in my family, I remember, so I married my now wife. She's a physician assistant in urgent care, which is way more practical, let me tell you, day to day than an EP. Like I could put my
That's
kids
awesome.
in sinus rhythm, but it's my wife that's really helping out with the, problem solving there. But anyways, yeah, no, I had, unfortunately 386 grand in student loans.
Oh.
Yeah. So, right towards the beginning of attendinghood, that's what I was looking at, and that's a pretty daunting number. I paid that off in 2 years flat. So in various ways, I'm a big fan. My financial education really started with the white coat investor, which I'm sure a lot of your viewers, have come across that. It's like one of the Bibles, if you will,
Absolutely.
So it's a great start. It gives you a fantastic foundation. And I was completely financially illiterate before the year 2014 when the white coat investor, I was a first year cardiology fellow, and it was a medical intern that introduced me to it. So you never know where the wisdom is coming from, so you got to be humble and kind of have your ears open. But yeah, no, it was pretty daunting. So my first focus really was paying off all that student loan, because you just felt like owned by someone else or something else, when you have that amount of, student loans. But that achieved, 25 months to the day, that I graduated as an attending. And that was like my major focus. So since I went into private practice, originally I just had refinanced my loans using SoFi, which is one of the more common kind of, carriers or whatever. Back then they had some really good interest rates, better than what the government was kind of giving. And then it was just raw horsepower, just making huge lump payments, every month. And, at that time, so I had joined the private practice knowing that they were going to get bought by private equity at some point. So I had worked in my contract a little clause that should they get purchased, I would become a partner. And then, because, a lot of these private practices, they'll try to screw over their like young recruits. And when they get purchased by private equity, if you're not a partner, well, so sorry, too bad, boo-hoo. But I kind of saw the writing on the wall. I had started practice. I trained in Boston, but I went back to Miami, which is my hometown, which is the Wild Wild West almost in healthcare in a lot of regards, to say the least. But anyways, I saw the writing on the wall and I figured they were telegraphing their move anyway. So I put that in my contract, and that gave me a nice boost to pay off my student loans and then segue over to home ownership or whatever, so it was like a lot of raw horsepower and then a nice little boost. And then I, went on to my next job after that. So kind of did that, but it was around the time that my now oldest, I also have a 5-year-old, just about, it's a girl. But anyways, when she was born, that's when it really dawned on me that I got to figure this out, meaning that just having a W-2 is not going to cut it. You can do the white co-investor stuff, and that's a good nucleus, like a good start, but you have to do something else. You got to figure it out, and what that is, I ended up in real estate for many, many different reasons, but I think usually something within real estate is like medicine almost. It's so varied that you could subspecialize. Like you yourself do assisted living facilities, which is a fantastic field, I personally do more like commercial syndications, and then MedTech is, what I've kind of focused more on. But whichever, you kind of have to start grabbing that W-2 income and, living still, modestly, not comfortable, but modestly grab that cash and funnel it over to growing alternate revenues of income, And I think that a master concept is the tax treatment between the two is night and day. The W-2 worker is who makes this country run, but very tax disadvantaged, big time. At the higher tax brackets, you're looking at like 37%, 37% of every dollar you earn after a certain, threshold. And you compare that to things such as like, long-term capital gains, which is already way favorable, right? Or the things that you can do with real estate. You can even postpone taxes. You can do so many different things that's what really kind of burns me inside. And it's just kind of like, once the light bulb goes off, then you sound like one of these like religious zealots trying to convert others. And, some people are ready to kind of hear that message. And some people just kind of have a blank face because it's very disconcerting not knowing something. It's very scary and uncomfortable. And we're not, as physicians, used to that necessarily, in the grand scheme.
Yeah, I completely agree. There's so many benefits to real estate. And as I've gotten older and really kind of understood the tax benefits, I mean, you're talking
Oh,
about massive
right
advantages.
away.
And a lot of times that tax benefit is not, it's a little bit harder to like calculate that and explain that in the pro forma in a way that's understood. But
Right.
that can be like a massive cherry on
Massive.
top on some of these opportunities. What do you think early on, what do you think physicians misunderstand about wealth building, or maybe a plan of action to attack massive student loan debt? What do you think kind of the misunderstanding is there? Why do you feel like a lot of physicians may fail or kind of flounder?
I think it's financial education. It's very scary because as an 18-year-old or a 22-year-old, depending if you're talking college or med school, you're making enormous financial decisions that at least myself, again, in full transparency, illiterate, didn't know. I simply did not know, and I imagine many other physicians are similar. Some are very privileged and maybe their parents are supremely savvy and they kind of, educate their kids. But I would argue probably most aren't, and then by the time you blink an eye and the power of compound interest and all that stuff, suddenly you're like, oh, Jesus, and it's a very stressful thing. I remember my guide during my training watching that number tick up, kind of like the U.S. national debt, it's just like the counter.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, Jesus Christ, this is pretty scary, But, at some point, you kind of just have to man or woman up and say, enough's enough. I'm not going to be scared. If you're smart enough to freaking pass step 1, 2, and 3 and whatever, I promise you, this is way easier than memorizing first aid or, all of these, difficult board exams. It's not that hard, but you just kind of have to start somewhere, and I think you're going to get a natural reaction of fear and you're going to feel uncomfortable and you just have to accept that. That's okay. So are you, I'm sure. And so was I, certainly, but at some point you start somewhere. So a good place is the White Coat Investor. It's very easy. It's 280 pages. You can read it on a weekend and on vacation or whatever and figure it out. It's a good little start. And if you only did that, you're at least going to stay out of trouble and you're going to live a comfortable kind of middle-class life, but to take the next level and to liberate yourself to like hang out with your kids, assuming you love your kids, and your family and stuff, you're going to have to figure it out, because you'll see a lot of our colleagues start whining about how the RVU went down by 0.5 and this and that and whatever. And while that is, not fair in a lot of different ways and stressful, you kind of, again, you have to create these alternate things in order to free up, your life. Imagine if you had so many alternate streams of income that you could, if you really didn't like your job, well, then, you can take some time off of working and go figure out something that you like, or whatever, but it's just nice having that mental peace and stability, and, once you kind of, pay off all debts and then you have these alternate income streams, you're not worried about your kids' college education anymore. You have real estate assets that will pay, one for each kid. It will appreciate, it will pay for your kids' education. So you're not perseverating on a 529 as much. I mean, you're still going to do it. You should, but you're not stressed. You're going to take care of that when the time comes. And so it's like, you start somewhere. I think everyone, you hear the terms, I wish I would have coined it, analysis paralysis. You get overwhelmed because it's a scary world. Well, just start somewhere. For me, it was White Coat Investor, which then eventually turned into something called Bigger Pockets, which is a very big real estate kind of online forum. It's not just for doctors, it's for everybody. And they have a wealth of, information and data and a very nice community at that. And then from there, you can kind of just branch off. Both you and I have, created little groups and stuff, for physicians. Well, because we are physicians, but we understand physicians, but something that promotes education with the bias of being a physician,
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great answer. And I think the other thing that trips people up a lot is kind of that lifestyle creep. Once you go from resident to attending and you're like, hey, I've worked so hard to now get this attending paycheck, and you really did. But the more you can kind of delay that lifestyle creep and put those into that alternative income streams or paying off your student debt, the better it's going to set you up down the road. And it's certainly worth it. I am speaking from a place of privilege because I was in the military and they paid off my student loans. However, I was also in the military.
Yeah,
So
military. It's not,
trust me, I
not a
paid
free line.
it off in some other ways. Yeah, exactly. And so, but anyways, it's just, it's if you can educate yourself, you can delay that lifestyle creep, you can really kind of tackle a student loan burden and set yourself up for success going forward. It's going to be massive. And, a really easy way to do it that I tell people all the time is like, think about how you can house hack as a resident, right? You can get a physician loan, no money down, buy a single family house, 4 or 5 bedrooms, rent out all the bedrooms to your buddies, cash flow while you're in residency, living for free and cash flowing on top of that. And what a great foundation to start you up for success.
Big time.
And so that I think is the best way to like really get started as a resident. But yeah, man, that's awesome. Well, let's talk about your real estate journey. So how did you initially get started investing in real estate?
Yeah. So, after I paid off my student loans, and it was really at that time also that my daughter, had been born and all that stuff, I started looking around, so at that point, we freed ourselves with the student loans. As you said, we were avoiding that lifestyle creep. Back then, we were living in Miami, which is a very high cost of living area, to say the least, which, makes things a little more challenging because your velocity of wealth generation is well lower because your overhead is higher, But despite that, it's still a doable thing. But then I started, looking around, So then you have to look around and educate yourself, So you had been doing the whole white coat investor shuffle. Solid. That's like, power eye football, nice conservative, play, whatever. But now for the more kind of pushing the needle forward, you're going to have to figure something else out, So then I kind of looked around, and at that point, with the use of bigger pockets and then looking around as well, I came upon different asset classes and their pros and cons, So we did the first thing that everyone gravitates to is long-term rentals. Okay. And it's like, you and maybe your wife had a condo and then you got married. Now you have a house and you rent out, her former condo. Most people kind of bumble their way into their first property or whatever, and they become the landlord, without kind of really jockeying for that. With long-term rentals, everything in life has its pros and cons. So with long-term rentals, it's the long game. Pretty much, you're not going to, with long-term rentals, depending on the property, maybe you'll make a couple $100 of cash flow if you're doing right, maybe 1,000, maybe 2,000, but that's a far cry of replacing your physician income, So it's like watching paint dry essentially, and to acquire these properties, usually you're going to be anywhere from 5 to 20% down, depending on what your financing vehicle is or whatever. So your economies of scale or your ability to scale are there, but they're slower, and more risk. If you're pumping in $200,000 into a property as a down payment, you're more, you're exposing yourself. It's just the name of the game. So then this was after the COVID era and all that. I was briefly looking at Airbnbs, and Airbnbs have their own pros and cons. They have really cool tax benefits. Really, if like your spouse were, to manage them and all that, that could conceivably offset even some W-2 income, if you're filing married or whatever under certain circumstances. But that's trading one job for another one, So it's like, yeah, congratulations. You're not, you're a physician or whatever in healthcare. And now you're also managing, an Airbnb. So with that, you can argue there's automations, there's CRMs and all this stuff. And yes, but the real money comes if you manage it yourself. If you're going to outsource it, short-term rental managements are going to be like 20%, or 10 to 15 to 20, which really carves in once again to your profit margins. So it's like a lot of work. And the Airbnb era was kind of cooling a little bit, and all the pretenders were kind of, getting out of the market essentially. And the people that knew what they were doing are the ones that stayed, So didn't really look at that. And then finally came across commercial real estate, which is something that's kind of scary a little bit because nothing about it. We sure as heck didn't get any education in medical school about anything financial, much less commercial real estate. But at first, in a passive role as something called limited partner, so this is where, you have usually 2 to 4 managing partners or operators, whatever you want to call them, that are putting together a deal. And it's when people pool together, their resources, purchase a property, and usually you have a business plan. So the one that was a little more approachable were multifamily properties, because you know what an apartment is. You just put a lot of them together, and the concept is not like rocket science. So kind of got started there, and it was really looking around. There was Dr. Raya, Vikram Raya, was kind of like my proof of concept. He's a cardiologist like I am, and he started in 2015 where I live now, which is Georgia. And he crushed it. He's been crushing. He's doing very well. Very, very well. And just kind of looking, time invested and potential outcome. It's hard to beat a well executed commercial deal. I mean, you have built-in economies of scale. You have some built-in risk mitigation, and it really falls on the operating team. Like, do they know what they're doing? Is it a good market? What's the business plan look like? So that's kind of how I got my start. And usually these syndications are going to be something like $50,000, So $50,000 is enough for you to care, for sure. And it's enough to see a nice return on investment. Okay, you turn that 50 and then maybe a handful of years later, you're walking away maybe with $100,000 or something like that. That's nice, and that moves the needle, and that has tax advantages. But that gets once you put skin in the game, now you're paying attention, and that will be your best education. You're going to be you're going to be reading top to bottom. Okay, what is a syndication? Okay, what's the concept? What am I looking at? And all that. When you have something invested, now you care. You should care, And that's how I got started on my first deal as a limited partner. That made me care. And then I devoured, like on Audible, physical books, the driving to work, driving from work, and just educating myself as much as possible. And then I hired coaches. A good coach will collapse that time scale, and you can learn from their errors. You grab them and they just kind of instruct you. You get to look at things through their eyes. So I invested in one coach and then a second one, and they have been phenomenal. Like, they're like enzymes, essentially. They catalyze your development at a velocity that, our company has been around for like a year and a little bit. And, we've already done, like 2, deals. And now we're about to announce, actually on my birthday, which is a week from today, we're about to announce our third, deal, which is actually MedTech, So that only is possible because you seek out, coaching, and you kind of have to just be open to that, But I think to get started, definitely looking at the limited partner role and just, find a group that looks like they know what they're doing and start educating yourself, And that's a good start. And then you could take it from there. How involved do you want to be? There's nothing wrong with remaining a passive partner. That's perfectly fine. You can make a lot of wealth like that. Or that can turn your fire on, and then that's going to like motivate you to go seek out, what do I really like? Do I like multifamily? Do I like assisted living facilities? Do I like, you can do anything like RV parks, like you name it, there's something for everyone. So.
Yeah, that is awesome. Yeah. Commercial real estate, is a huge wealth generator and an incredible opportunity. And it's completely different, right? Those economies of scale are massive. The tax benefits are massive. It's valued so much differently, right? We're not looking at single family comps. We're looking at what's the net operating income of the property, what's the cap rate, like the amount of value you can generate just by doing little things is enormous. And so it is a really, really cool opportunity. Dr. Rodriguez, what does a good deal look like for you, in terms of like maybe cash flow or downside protection or tax benefits or the team? What does a good deal look like for you?
Yeah, so if you think about deals, you're looking at a couple different parameters, right? It kind of depends on what you want out of the deal because they're all going to behave differently. So for example, if you're looking at like a MedTech opportunity, MedTech is sexy in a lot of ways, but it's also, if you don't know what you're looking at, it could be a problem. There's risk built into anywhere. Now, MedTechs, all sound fantastic in the beginning, but it's a long, process. So it's like something like MedTech, for example, can have massive tax benefits, and you could have multiples of your initial investment. It is not unheard of of, you can invest a 50K block, for example, and 5 years later, walk away with like 10 times your initial investment. That is, not an unheard of and not as uncommon as you would think. And by the way, usually in those scenarios, federal tax privilege because of the Qualified Small Business Act or whatever. So you can literally, you would be hard pressed to name another asset class that can claim that, However, you have to be very choosy and selective about who you're dabbling with, because with MedTech, for example, you're looking at people who know what they're doing, that have a track record of, getting things through the FDA, of a well executed, thought out business plan and a clear vision. This is the deliverables. This is what we're going to do. This is the timetable, so on and so forth. So I only got involved in MedTech because of the group that I've been associated with, like the deal that we're launching in about a week, in mid-January or whatever. The guy, created one of my favorite tools that I use in my field, actually. And he sold that company for $150 million, So
wow,
that was a ridiculous return on investment for initial investment. Yeah. So his record, when he introduced himself to me, that was one of the first things that he said, rightfully so. And that got my attention. I'm like, okay, yeah, no, this guy has been there, done that. But usually with commercial real estate, you're looking for a couple of different things. So as a physician, I tend to focus more on the capital component. And I get to, as such, I get to be very choosy about what operators I work with, So how that works is that when a deal is put together, usually you're going to have, some capital specialists and some operators, and they marry together and they're pushing this deal forward. With your operators, you're looking at a track record of success. We're looking for an IRR at least 20% or more. A time horizon on average in these syndications, about 5 years or so is the average. If it's a little shorter, that's a plus, but your investment would be illiquid in that. And then you're looking for tax benefits. So something that you like to see is something called depreciation. Depreciation is a paper loss that the IRS allows you to declare, and all that. Now, there's something called bonus depreciation, meaning that when you acquire one of these massive properties, like let's say 200 apartment units or whatever it is, the operators and the team usually, with little to no exception, should run something called a cost segregation analysis. That's just a fancy thing where an engineer comes out and they tell you, okay, of this purchase price, this is how much, you're allowed to depreciate and accelerate that to the beginning of the deal. So why that matters is because you grab those tax benefits and they flow through to all investors, whether you're limited or a general partner or whatever. And you could carry those paper losses with you when you're filing your taxes. So that really helps offset any passive income that you may have. So usually there are exceptions, but usually not your W-2 income directly. But if you have passive income streams and all that, these tax benefits really supercharge that, and that capital can be deployed once again to make you more and more wealth. It's kind of like an animal that just feeds on itself. But yeah, it's exciting, man. Once you get started talking about this stuff, you can talk about it all day.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Well, it's definitely evident that you're super passionate and knowledgeable on the space. And you're right, man, that snowball, once it starts rolling, once you get that first direct deposit, and you're like, man, this money, I made this money while I was sleeping. Then you're like, I got to get more of it, know, and it's a fantastic opportunity. Well, let's talk, this has been really tactical. Let's talk a little bit more about kind of the doc that's listening and they're sitting here and they're thinking like, well, I got $50,000, $100,000. I want to get started in the next 30 days or so. What are the kind of top 3 actions that you tell them if it's a doctor sitting on the sidelines, they're thinking they're ready to invest? What would you tell them? Any 3 things that stick out for you?
Yeah, I think that, number one is education. So congratulations, amassing $50,000 is challenging. Like it's not, it takes savings and all that stuff, but you got to educate yourself. There's no substitute for that. Doctors were very trusting, individuals usually, but you really got to protect yourself by educating yourself. So I think and to do so, you could join, like Dr. Schlow's here group is fantastic. It's a lot of free education. These podcasts are fantastic. Certainly I did not have access to any podcast like this when I was in training, I sound like an old man.
Thanks.
But anyways,
I didn't either.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So, joining like, a Facebook group like ours, or these podcasts or whatever, is free education. Just digest that, go all in, read as much as you can and educate yourself. Then I would say, to begin as a limited partner, I think that is the best education is by doing, so once you kind of have at least some education, you can kind of assess a little bit, differently and all that stuff. You can become a part of a group like mine, like yours. There's good groups out there where, you're provided more education and then you go through, these opportunities. Any good group should educate their potential investors. So you really want to have webinars, you kind of want to go through PowerPoints. You want to go through, something called a sensitivity analysis. So everyone, when they're trying to pitch something, is going to paint a picture of rainbows and leprechauns and unicorns and stuff, but reality punches you in the face, So you got, there's always that quote, like everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face. I think Tyson said that before any fight. But anyways, you got to prepare for the worst also, so any good business plan should have conservative underwriting, meaning that their assumptions, should not be overly optimistic. They should prepare for rough waters and stuff. And a good deal should always float even in rough seas. Of course, if there's lucky bounces that go your way, that's great, but the deal should still do well under tense, stress, And I think starting off there, once you have a plan for your student debt, if that's even applicable, and once you kind of have your automated, like, your employer match, you put in, the 529s or the backdoor Roth or whatever, that should all be in place. This is not a substitute for that, But once you're starting to branch out, educate yourself, align yourself with like-minded, groups and all that. And it's okay not to know. Everyone starts at some point. I find myself learning every day, and so do you, Alex, but I think starting there and then honestly starting as a limited partner. I think that's the best education for something that vibes with you. It can be an asset class that makes sense financially, but that you also find kind of interesting, and kind of just take it from there. You will declare yourself where you're most interested in, and then you'll spark a passion there. And then you'll just kind of really, go down the rabbit hole and start devouring information. And before you know it, 2 or 3 years down the road, you've completely expanded your fund of knowledge there,
Yeah, that's a fantastic answer. I completely agree. And I think a lot of times you get stuck in that shiny object syndrome and analysis paralysis. And, I tell folks all the time, I don't think shiny object syndrome is like a bad thing, right? Like I look at it kind of as when you're getting started, you're going to the ice cream shop and there's a bunch of different flavors and each of those flavors are a different asset class. And it's okay to ask for a free sample. And maybe that's making a small investment in one of those asset classes. Then once you figure out what you really like that's what you're getting the couple scoops of ice cream, right? And so I think that's a great way to do it. I mean, for me, I think I went through almost every asset class before I landed on assisted living and absolutely love it, right? Yeah. And so it is okay to do some sampling and see what fits and what fits, your goals too, right? Like some of these asset classes are going to cash flow way more. Some are going to appreciate more. Some are going to have more tax benefits. And so figure out what figure out what your game plan is, what your strategy is, what are your goals, right? If you're like, hey, I just want to keep working my W-2 and I just want all the tax benefits. That might change what you want to invest in. Right. If you're like, hey, I really want cash flow, that's going to change it as well. And so figure out what your 1 year, 3 year, 5 year vision is and really spend some time to really nail that down and then work backwards. And you'll see it's really not that difficult. If you can get through med school, board exams, residency, you can totally do this. Yeah. And so just get started.
Yeah, I think that's a great message. You can totally do that. There's nothing, like both Alex and myself, it just starts with, finding a why, and I think both of us, we both have, just about 5-year-olds. We both kind of have a similar timetable by coincidence, but for me, it's not so much that I'm chasing material objects like, oh, I want the shiny car parked in my garage. Like, don't get me wrong. Yeah, sure. That's nice and all. But my personal why is just, I want just agency. Like I want empowerment. Like I want to choose how I want to spend my time, and where to spend my time. Family is very important to me. And that's really my why. And that's what lights the fire, because you're going to need something to keep that fire going. And, maybe some people do like shiny objects, and that's fine, to each his own or whatever. But when, it's there's always ups and downs to anything, and especially during the down moments and stuff, your why is what's going to guide you through. You're always going to remind yourself of why you're doing this in the first place,
Yeah, the entrepreneurial journey is also very difficult, and you got to have that why, or else you're gonna be like, man, why am I doing this? What's this all worth? Why am I up at 8:14 Mountain Time, 10:14 I think for you in Miami, doing a podcast, right? It's like, hey, well, we want to give back to other physicians and help them, really grow and excel and have a lot more opportunity than we had when we were in medical school. And so, it's just you got to figure out what that is, what you're passionate about, and just get after it. I love that. Well, I want to be respectful of your time. What's something you're working on? And it sounds like it's this upcoming deal. What's something that you're working on right now that you're really passionate about?
So what I mentioned a little bit ago was later this month. This is going to air in a little bit, but at the end of January, we're going to have a formal webinar about a MedTech opportunity. So the group that I mentioned, they are a fantastic group. Collectively, they've already cleared 21 FDA products, which to clear one is challenging. These guys have done it 21 times. And it is a who's who. Their CFO is from, former Stryker, which is a big medical supply company. And these guys are really seasoned, successful. So they designed a creatively called a Corona blade. But anyways, it's a glass-coated plasma blade, which is a finesse. It's almost like a replacement to the Bovie, which is like a universal surgical tool. Well, anyways, he designed this from the ground up, and it's a fantastic piece of equipment. And then it's coupled with a surgical lens, which could see blood flow and bacteria, actually. Wow. And lastly, that's coupled with an AI co-pilot. So during a surgery, open surgery, you're going to have a little lens, and it's all cost effective. It's disposables only. There's not like capital expenditures or anything like that, with machine learning to kind of help surgeons make better decisions, targeting first my field, which is electrophysiology and surgical oncology, but also looking at wound debridement and stuff like that, which has a 29% failure rate, in their surgeries. So this device is well under its way, So at the end of January, it's actually the first full. I've been approached many times for MedTech, but this is the first one that I'm like, okay, these guys are legitimate, So we're going in with that one, and we're going to do, we're already soft commits well exceeded our $1 million raise. But on paper, it's a $1 million raise, but we've already exceeded that on soft commits. But we'll be announcing that one at the end of January. And like I said, that has a potential for many multiples, like his last project did, of a return. And more importantly, tax advantage, because it is a small business and therefore could avoid, any federal taxes, not state, but federal taxes, which is huge. So that's something that I have been working on in December and getting ready here in January. So it's been great. It's been great to see how MedTech is developed, like from the idea to the prototypes to the animal testing, and then the funding and the investment component, which is like ironic because us being in healthcare, we have like no exposure to that aspect. And we're the ones that are best positioned to make decisions about what is good and what isn't in medicine because we use it. So it's been a fantastic experience so far. Yeah, that's our project to start 2026 in.
That's awesome, man. Very, very cool. Yeah. And it's just a perfect example of like, there's a million ways to make $1 million. And
Right.
MedTech, another way that you can do it, multifamily, short-term rentals, long-term rentals, boutique hotels. I mean, there's so many different opportunities out there. So figure out what you're passionate about and get after it and be willing to take a little bit of risk because the reward can certainly be worth it. And obviously do all your financial due diligence and talk to, your tax professionals and your attorney and all those sorts of things, but figure out if it's a good opportunity for you. So that's really cool. I'd love to learn more about that. It's fascinating. I try and think about all the time, like, how can I come up with something that could be used like that? The thing that always comes up in my mind that I'm like, why did I not think of that is the nose Frida, right? So every family medicine doc and pediatrician and now every parent in the world has a nose Frida. I'm like, it's just a snot sucker. Like, how do we not come up with that? So, yeah, if anybody knows the doc that started that, I'd love to have her on the podcast. Yeah, 'cause she was a genius. Yeah, so cool. So I'm like, man, what's the nose Frida that I can come up with right now?
I know, man.
But I'm an idea man. I'm not. I struggle with the implementation. So if someone's an implementer, I got a bunch of ideas.
Perfect.
But yeah, man. Well, this has been awesome. Well, before we wrap things up, do you mind sharing how folks can reach out to you if they want to learn more about this opportunity or they want to connect with you?
Yeah, sure. I think two main ways. I think you'll be sharing links wise, but our website is www.cardia with a C, REI, which stands for realestateinvestments.com. So cardiarei.com. And we also have a Facebook group, facebook.com/groups/cardia partners, so that's like a private little group where it's mainly physicians and healthcare professionals. And again, we just kind of share, resources, tax resources, education, and then, webinars, case studies, so on and so forth. Alex has a fantastic group. If you're listening to this, you should be part of it. I mean, come on. But these are the groups with like-minded, it's kind of like small little groups of survivors, these like-minded physicians. It's like refreshing. Like, you're not going to get shamed or anything by talking about finances, or no scarlet letter, you're amongst friends, so
yeah,
I think
exactly right.
Those are the two ways.
Yeah, we'll include those links for sure in the show notes. And man, this has been really fun. A long time coming. And I really appreciate your time. Happy early birthday as of the recording. By the time this comes out, it'll probably be after your birthday. So everyone reach out to Dr. Rodriguez, give him happy birthday and check out that webinar. But with that, we'll go ahead and wrap things up. It's been Dr. Yasser Rodriguez and Dr. Alex Schlow with another episode of the Physicians and Properties podcast. Signing off. Hey, real quick, if you're still listening to this, I'm assuming you got value from it. So I need your help specifically. My 2-year vision with this podcast is to help 100,000 physicians learn how investing in real estate can give you the freedom to practice medicine and live life how you want. There are 2 main ways that a podcast grows. One is through ratings and reviews, and the other is word of mouth. If you can please leave me a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, as well as send this to 1 to 2 friends that you think would get value from it, we can reach the physicians that we want to reach. Thanks in advance, and talk to you on the next episode. Please note that the information shared on this podcast is for informational purposes only. It should not be considered financial, medical advice. The views expressed on this podcast are those of the host and the guest and do not necessarily reflect the views of the Department of Defense or the United States Air Force.